there. I was just reading up about life in the Alaskan Arctic. I bet you didn't know that over 4 million people are estimated to be living in the Arctic Circle. During this week, we would like to focus on those people living in one of the most unique and quickly changing regions in the world. According to the Arctic Council, about 4 million people live in the Arctic today. This precise number depends on what definition of the Arctic Circle you use, and as you know from the first video, there are many ways to define the Arctic. In fact, using a more broad definition, according to the University of the Arctic Atlas, there are approximately 13.1 million people living in the area of the circumpolar north. The largest cities above the Arctic Circle are in Russia. Murmansk with about 325,000 people, Norilsk with about 130,000, and Vorkuta with about 85,000. This is compared with Reykjavik, Iceland, which has about 200,000 people, and Tromsø, Norway, with roughly 70,000 inhabitants. The population of the Arctic consists of indigenous peoples, recent movers from all over the world, hunters and herders, and city dwellers. As you know, the Arctic includes 8 nations: Norway, Sweden, Finland, Greenland, Iceland, Canada, Russia, and the United States, as well as the homelands of dozens of indigenous groups that encompass distinct subgroups and communities. Indigenous people currently make up roughly 10% of the total Arctic population, though in Canada they represent about half the nation's Arctic population, and in Greenland they are the majority. There are 6 permanent participants of the Arctic Council. The Arctic Athabascan Council represents American and Canadian Athabascan member First Nation governments and seeks to foster a greater understanding of the shared heritage of Athabascan peoples of Arctic North America. The Russian Association of Indigenous Peoples of the North is an umbrella organization which organizes 35 regional and ethnic organizations of indigenous peoples in the regions where they live. RIPON represents 41 groups of indigenous peoples of the North, Siberia, and the Far East. The Sami Council is a voluntary Sami organization with Sami member organizations in Finland, Russia, Norway, and Sweden. The Gwich'in Council International was established as a non-profit organization in 1999 by the Gwich'in Tribal Council in Inuvik, Northwest Territories to ensure all regions of the Gwich'in Nation and the Northwest Territories, Yukon, and Alaska are represented at the Arctic Council. The Aleut International Association is an Alaska Native non-for-profit corporation and was formed to address environmental and cultural concerns of the extended Aleut family, whose well-being has been connected to the rich resources of the Bering Sea for millennia. The Inuit Circumpolar Council is a major international non-government organization representing approximately 150,000 Inuit of Alaska, Canada, Greenland, and Chukotka in Russia. Among Arctic regions, Alaska's population increased at a faster rate than that of the U.S. average. The regions of the Canadian Arctic also increased at a faster rate than that of Canada as a whole. Population growth in Iceland was 14%, like that of the North American Arctic. In all Arctic regions of Fennoscandia, population growth was less than the countries as a whole, and the population of the Russian Arctic declined by 6%. Changes in Arctic population is driven by migration. The major trend in most Arctic regions is migration losses to the south and migration gains from abroad. Most Arctic regions are seeing migration from abroad from people seeking work in resource extraction and service sectors, which make up a great deal of the economy. During the 1950s and 60s, the number of Arctic peoples started to grow rapidly because of improved healthcare for indigenous populations and the discovery of vast natural resources located in the north, which led to a large influx of immigrants. It is estimated that 2/3 of the population lives in relatively large settlements. The settlement of the indigenous peoples living in circumpolar countries is characterized by small, widely scattered communities. Many distinct indigenous groups, such as the Inuit in Canada and Greenland, The Yupik, Inupiat, and Athabascan in Alaska are only found in the Arctic, where they continue traditional activities and adapt to the modern world at the same time. Anthropologists and archaeologists believe that humans have lived in the Arctic for as much as 20,000 years. In the past few centuries, however, the influx of new arrivals has increased pressure on the Arctic environment through rising fishing and wildlife harvests, as well as industrial development. It is important to note that these groups are very distinct and by no means monolithic. There are certainly some aspects of shared heritage and languages, but for example, the Inuit of Canada are not the same as the Inuit of Greenland. The Arctic is home to a diversity of peoples and cultures. In former times, many indigenous peoples saw themselves as a small group in a particular area, not as members of a larger ethnic nation. Traditionally, Arctic native peoples lived primarily from hunting, fishing, herding, and gathering wild plants for food. Northern people found many ways to adapt to the harsh climate, developing warm dwellings and clothing to protect them from frigid weather. They also learned how to predict the weather and navigate in boats and on sea ice. There's an active movement among indigenous people in the Arctic to pass on traditional knowledge and skills such as hunting, fishing, herding, and native languages to the younger generation. Many Arctic coastal communities and facilities face increasing threats of storms and shore erosion because of climate change. Many communities have already been disrupted and entire villages are seeking to relocate. Once frozen and now thawing ground is disrupting transportation and construction of infrastructure such as roads and buildings. There is also evidence of change in the diversity, range, and distribution of animal species and of the Arctic vegetation zones beginning to shift with potentially wide-ranging disruptive effects. For example, in Igloolik, an Inuit community in Nunavut, Canada, changing sea ice is one of many factors contributing to a high prevalence of episodes of food insecurity among residents. Igloolik is located on a small island and its residents require either open water for boating or stable ice for travel by snow machine in order to hunt walrus, fish, access caribou hunting grounds, and travel to other communities. The ice season in the sea near Igloolik declined from 9 to 7 months between 1979 and 2008, with freeze-up moving from November to December. This means a longer period during which hunting is not possible. The Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium has put together several reports that describe climate impacts observed in Alaska communities and rely upon observations, data, and traditional ecological knowledge provided by local partners. At Atquisuk, Alaska, residents report changes to weather, seasons, landscape, plants, wildlife, and infrastructure, with important implications for public health. Atquisuk is a river community vulnerable to thawing of permafrost and erosion on the riverbank and in tundra lakes. Subsistence activities are a major component of Atquisuk's economy, and a range of species are hunted, including caribou, polar bear, ducks, and geese. In the Mead River, people catch grayling, burbot, salmon, and whitefish. Local harvestable berries near the village include salmon berries, cranberries, and blueberries. Many of the reported changes are unprecedented, and residents are challenged to develop knowledge that will allow them to continue to sustain traditional practices. Climate change in Atquisuk raises new concerns about food and water security, safety, and mental health related to the stress of adapting to a new climate and changing environment.